Your Honor, the defendant is charged with the murder of Odin Lloyd. His body was discovered approximately 1/2 mile from the defendant's home.
Aaron Hernandez faced the ultimate accusation, slaughtering his closest pal in the first degree, and the whole world watched the damning footage play out on screen. A tight brotherhood shattered during a midnight ride that spiraled into treachery and gunfire. That single event ripped the lid off a violent streak that had been festering for ages. Here is the origin story of a friendship turned deadly. It started back in 2009 in Bristol, Connecticut. When Alexander Bradley first crossed paths with Aaron Hernandez, these guys had plenty in common. From the same hometown stomping grounds to a shared love for wild nights and blazing through weed, Bradley morphed into Hernandez's main connection for pot, pushing huge amounts for both personal stashes and side hustles. As the tight end's star rose with the Patriots, their bond only got tighter. You couldn't pry them apart. They were constantly jet-setting, hitting up strip joints, and tearing up the nightlife scene from Boston down to the streets of Miami. Bradley played the role of muscle and constant shadow for Hernandez, who was getting increasingly twitchy and paranoid thanks to his massive fame and old beefs, positioning himself as the athlete's right-hand man. Bradley shared in everything: the endless club hopping, the social climbing, and the illicit drug trades, even with a rap sheet. Bradley was one of the rare few Hernandez actually trusted with his secrets while he was rocketing to the top of the football world. But it was a toxic mix, constantly on the verge of exploding, stoked by narcotics, firearms, and Hernandez's creeping fear that everyone was out to cross him. Their deal was simple. Bradley brought the product, while Hernandez bankrolled the operation and opened the velvet ropes to the VIP life. They frequented gentlemen's clubs and threw down in South Beach, with Bradley standing witness to some of the grimmest chapters in the football star's existence.
Feeling pretty good, and I'm happy. You see him smiling.
Talk about the experience. Being a father for the first time, you spoke when you got the contract about your life changing. Is this another one of those?
Definitely a life changer. Especially every time I come to the stadium, can't wait to go see. You always dream of it, but you never really think it's gonna come. And then when it happens, and you know there's a good chance you're set for life as long as you handle it the right way. It's an honor, and it seemed so surreal. Like, is it really true? And a lot more to give back, and all I could do is play my heart out for them, make the right decisions.
Come sundown, he was running with thugs, abusing substances, and stockpiling enough firepower for a war. Bradley was his bridge to the underworld. The guy keeping him stocked, he held the keys to every skeleton in the closet. Yet, the glue binding them would eventually destroy them. Bradley was way more than just a supplier. He was the sole person who saw Hernandez allegedly pull the trigger in a double murder back in 2012. On July 15th, they were partying at Cure Lounge in Boston. Bradley swore under oath that it started over nothing. Daniel Abreu bumped into the star on the dance floor and splashed a drink on him by mistake. Hernandez took it as a massive insult and flew into a rage, which only got worse when he spotted Abreu and his buddy Safiro Furtado grinning at him later on. The pair exited the venue right around 2 in the morning.
Your intention at that point?
To pull up to the car.
What, if any, observations did you make prior to that point regarding the glove box?
After I got through that light, as I was approaching the car, he removed the firearm from the glove box.
He being who?
Mr. Hernandez.
What did you think was going to happen, Mr. Brad?
I thought at the very most, he might try to intimidate him or, maybe say something or address the issue that happened previously in the club.
Did you have any idea he was going to do anything more than that?
No.
Hernandez, clutching rosary beads, allegedly hung out the window and emptied a .38, firing 5 rounds. Abreu took one to the head, Furtado to the chest, dead on the spot. 2 others made it out alive.
Did he state anything about what his intentions were?
No.
After he said go and you went through the red light and observed the gun being taken out, what happened next?
As I was approaching, there was another light after that. I believe that car was at a red light. I believe the light was red. And as I was approaching the car, he told me, watch out, he was telling me, roll the window down first is what he said, roll the window down. And I rolled the window down, And when we got up to the car, like right when we were approaching, he put his hand on my chest and was like, watch out, like indicating for me to, like, you know, like pushing me back kind of in the seat, like so I could lean back.
Yo, what happened next?
He wound up saying yo again. And then they turned and then he started firing rounds into their vehicle.
Did he say something before he fired?
Before he fired the gun, he was like, what's up now? And he started firing shots.
Hernandez faced charges for the double slaying in 2014, but the jury cleared him of all counts in 2017. His lawyers spun a story that Bradley was the real shooter in a drug deal gone wrong, turning the former friend into a massive liability, the one man linking Hernandez to the crime. And the athlete knew it. Those Boston killings in 2012 peeled back the curtain on Hernandez's habit of answering minor insults with extreme brutality. Daniel de Abreu, 29, and Safiro Furtado, 28, were military vets and immigrants from Cape Verde trying to make a life in Dorchester, Massachusetts. These guys were total strangers to Hernandez. They were just a couple of buddies unwinding at Cure Lounge after a shift, right around 12:30 in the morning. Once the night wrapped, Hernandez and Bradley tailed de Abreu and Furtado's BMW. They sat in Hernandez's silver Toyota 4Runner, waiting at a red light near Shawmut and Herald about 2 hours later. That's when the slaughter went down. It was brutal and premeditated, all triggered by a spilled cocktail and a look that Hernandez took the wrong way. The district attorney would later paint a picture of a man fueled by booze, narcotics, and deep-seated paranoia, claiming Hernandez saw disrespect in every shadow at the club. They stashed the SUV-23 in a relative's garage, and Hernandez slipped right back into his pro-athlete persona. He just went back to playing ball like nothing happened. He was racking up touchdowns and inking a $40 million deal, while Bradley kept his lips sealed. But holding on to a secret that dark starts to rot you from the inside. Bradley had a front-row seat to Hernandez's violence. He knew the score, but he made the fatal mistake of bringing it up during their fights, sealing his own fate. Then came the breaking point. Early February 2013, the pair flew down to Miami, Florida, looking for a wild weekend of partying. They hit up Tootsie Cabaret, blowing cash like water. Hernandez supposedly dropped 10 grand, but the night turned ugly with a blowout fight, likely over debt, drugs, or the ghosts of those Boston killings. On the stand, Bradley later swore that Hernandez was spiraling, terrified of being tailed by cops or tracked by police choppers. It all came to a head on February 13th, 2013. They left the club at 4 a.m., with Bradley behind the wheel of a rental and Hernandez riding shotgun. Bradley dozed off while driving. He woke up to the cold steel of a .38, the same caliber from the Boston hit aimed right between his eyes. Hernandez pulled the trigger. The bullet smashed into Bradley's right eye and cheek. Blood was everywhere, and he blacked out for a second. But miraculously, he didn't die. Thinking the job was done, Hernandez allegedly tossed Bradley's body in an alley behind a John Deere shop in Riviera Beach and sped off. Strangers found him that morning, bleeding out on the asphalt, and rushed him straight to St. Mary's Medical Center in West Palm Beach. Surgeons couldn't save his eye. When the cops came knocking, Bradley shut them down, spinning a yarn about a drug deal gone south with some random thugs. He wasn't interested in legal justice. He wanted payback. He swore he'd handle Hernandez himself, street style. By June 2013, Bradley changed tactics and slapped Hernandez with a civil suit, demanding cash for his injuries and naming the N.F.L. star as the gunman. They settled quietly in February 2016 for a secret sum. The motive, the prosecution said Hernandez was consumed by paranoia after the double homicide in 2012. Hernandez had worked himself into a frenzy, believing Bradley was bound to rat him out to the feds eventually. That fear spiked every time they argued, and Bradley threw the Boston incident in his face. Hernandez saw his friend as a loose end. Bradley was the only guy who watched him pull the trigger on those strangers, making him a massive liability. Add heavy weed smoking, a history of snapping, and the brain-rotting effects of CTE, confirmed after his death, and you had a ticking time bomb. It was a toxic mix of high-stakes pressure, drug-fueled benders, and late nights in strip joints that pushed him over the edge. Hernandez allegedly saw murder as a cleanup operation. He left Bradley bleeding in the dirt just to keep his secrets buried and silence a potential snitch. But Bradley lived, and his memory was crystal clear. The scene was a mess, Bradley alone in an alley, half blind and left to die. Even as they wheeled him into the emergency room at St. Mary's, he kept his mouth shut about who actually pulled the trigger. He stuck to the script, bad deal. Random shooters. He claimed ignorance. But inside, Bradley was seething with a need for retribution. He planned to hunt Hernandez down personally. That plan only got scrapped when Hernandez got cuffed for the Odin Lloyd murder in June 2013. That June lawsuit in 2013 was purely about the money. He wanted Hernandez to pay up for the eye he took and the face he ruined. The legal docs laid it out plain. Hernandez tried to put a bullet right through his skull and left him for dead. While the cash settlement came through in 2016, Bradley had already cut a much more dangerous deal with the law by then. Flashback to February 2014, Bradley caught more lead, taking bullets to the leg during a club brawl in Hartford, Connecticut. That mess, plus other charges, got him a 5-year stretch. While he was locked up, the prosecutors saw an opening and paid him a visit. They knew Bradley held the ace card for the Boston double homicide. He was the guy who could bury the Patriots' star for good. The offer was straightforward: tell us everything about Boston, and you walk free on those murder charges with full immunity. He'd get a total pass for being at the scene of the day Abreu and Furtado hits, plus immunity for his role as the dope man. All he had to do was sing. Bradley grabbed the lifeline, flipping from a victim into the prosecution's golden ticket. Remember, this guy was still facing heat for that Hartford nightclub shooting in February 2014, where he got tagged in the leg. It had nothing to do with Aaron, but it landed him a 5-year bid. That prison cell is exactly where the D, to Archon A, found him and offered the trade. Snitch on Hernandez. And we wiped the slate clean. Bradley signed the paper. The target became the whistleblower who exposed everything. Watching Bradley pivot from career criminal to key witness was surreal. This was a guy who lived his whole life dodging the rules. We're talking about a hardened felon with a rap sheet and a stash of military-grade hardware, even after cutting a deal with the government. Yet there he was, the centerpiece of the biggest sports murder trial in American history. You couldn't write irony that thick. Hernandez's lawyers pounded on that fact. They asked the jury, are you really going to trust the life of a star on the word of a violent thug? How do you give a free pass to a guy standing right there during a double murder? How do you put your faith in a man who started off lying about getting shot himself? The state had their backs against the wall. Though, Bradley was the one man who saw it all. No Bradley meant no conviction. And despite his baggage, he was ready to spill the ugly truth, even if it dragged his own name through the mud. Then the prosecution's ace plays his hand. Bradley took the stand, pointing the finger at Hernandez in 2 massive legal battles. He walked away with total immunity, the price paid for his cooperation. His story filled in the critical blanks. But the defense team came out swinging. They painted him as a hardened thug and dope peddler, arguing he was the one who actually pulled the trigger in Boston. During the Odin Lloyd trial in 2015, Bradley showed up to testify, but the judge put a gag on him regarding the Florida and Boston shootings to keep the jury unbiased. Bradley had to stick to talking about Hernandez's temperament and who he hung out with, keeping the darker details under wraps. That case ended with Hernandez guilty of first-degree murder, locked up for life with no chance of getting out. The trial itself was a total media circus. Hernandez is innocent, plain and simple. We're standing here today because the cops and the D, Abreu, had a target on Aaron's back from day one, the second they connected Aaron Hernandez, the celebrity football star, the New England Patriot, to Odin Lloyd. The guy never stood a ghost of a chance. The defense laid their cards on the table right from the start, hammering home how close Hernandez and Lloyd actually were. The motive the prosecutor cooked up: absolute insanity. Why would he murder his buddy Odin? The guy was his marijuana connection. If Aaron hitched up with Shayna and Odin married Shayna, they would have literally been brothers-in-law. The state fired back with a massive pile of circumstantial proof. But Bradley dropped his biggest bombshells during the trial for the 2012 slayings of Abreu and Furtado, acting as the state's heavy hitter. On March 20th, 2017, Bradley sat in the witness box and laid out a terrifying, blow-by-blow narrative. He broke down the scene at Cure Lounge on July 15th, 2012, a spilled drink and an accidental bump on the dance floor. Hernandez took it as a major insult, especially with the victims smirking at him. So he flew into a rage and stalked them out of the club. Bradley claimed he was behind the wheel of Hernandez's silver Toyota 4Runner, shadowing the victim's BMW until they hit a red light at Shawmut and Herald. He said Hernandez, draped in rosary beads, leaned out the window and taunted them. "Yo, what's up now?" Then he unloaded 5 rounds from a .38 revolver, taking Abreu out with a shot to the head and hitting Furtado in the chest. 2 others in the car made it out alive. "Did you hear anything after the shots fired?" "Yeah. Clicking sounds." He emptied the clip and the hammer kept snapping. "I heard 3 or 4 clicks. Just dry firing, coming right from the weapon." "Did you look over while he was shooting? Did you see inside their vehicle at that moment?" "No. I looked the other way. I turned my head to the right, away from the gunfire." Bradley's memory was sharp, precise. He broke down the weapon specs, where everyone was sitting, and the exact words spoken. He recalled the hollow sound of the empty chamber, the adrenaline of racing down one-way streets, and the heavy realization of what had just gone down. The moment he started blasting, I whipped my head this way, which put me facing him. What happened after those 5 shots and the clicking stopped? He just said, "Go." He was like, "Go." You know, after the gun clicked dry, he was just like, "Come on, let's get out of here. Let's go." "Where did you drive? Which way?" I peeled off through the light and hooked a right, which turned out to be the wrong way down a one-way street. When I realized my mistake, I whipped a U-turn right there in the road, but I got stuck at a red light. The trial had these weird moments of lightness in the middle of all that grim testimony. Hernandez was actually smiling while his buddies were on the stand. He looked chilled out, confident, almost like he'd already read the last page of the script. After the smoke cleared, Hernandez allegedly warned Bradley, "Keep your mouth shut," and they took off. Bradley also opened up about the Florida incident, claiming Hernandez tried to take him out because he was paranoid about loose ends. He described waking up with a gun barrel in his face and the chaos that followed. "Mr. Bradley, before the break, we were discussing the violence inherent in the drug trade. Do you recall that?" "Yes." "Okay. And you mentioned it could get violent." "Yes." "All right. So, is dealing drugs a violent profession?" Objection sustained. Defense attorney Jose Baez went after Bradley hard on March 21st, 2017, tearing into his motives, his rap sheet, and every little contradiction. Baez spun a narrative that Bradley was the trigger man in Boston over a drug deal that went south, and that he was singing like a canary just to save his own skin. Bradley kept his cool through the heat, even while owning up to his past lies and crimes. The cross-exam dragged Bradley's violent history into the light, including his arsenal of military-grade hardware like Mac 9s and Mac 11s. Baez hammered on the fact that Bradley was a 2-time convicted felon who held onto assault rifles even after shaking hands on a deal with the government. "You were already a convicted felon at that point." "Correct. That's correct." "Okay. And after you got your immunity deal, did any cops come by to collect that weapon?" Objection. Asked and answered, no. The defense tried to paint Bradley as totally untrustworthy, highlighting his initial lies to detectives about the Florida shooting and the threatening texts he sent Hernandez. But the prosecution insisted Bradley was being brutally honest, sharing the ugly details even when they made him look like a monster. The tension in that room was thick. Bradley walked in there, knowing the defense was out to bury him. Jose Baez, the guy who got Casey Anthony off, was absolutely ruthless. His game plan was obvious: make Bradley the killer. He zeroed in on his long criminal record, his stash of assault weapons, and his violent streak. The defense attorney hammered home the point that Bradley started this whole mess by lying to the cops about the Florida incident. He spotlighted the menacing texts where Bradley warned Hernandez about having wolves on deck, bragging about his stash of Macs and Mac 11s. Even with that heat, Bradley didn't fold. He owned it all: the drug dealing, the illegal guns, the initial lies to law enforcement. Yet, when it came to the heart of his story, he stayed rock solid. The man behind the gun was Aaron Hernandez. Prosecutors painted Bradley as a guy so committed to the truth he'd expose his own dirt just to get the facts out. They insisted he had zero reason to fabricate anything since his immunity deal was already in the bag. He gave them everything he had. The jurors sat through days of Bradley on the stand and watched the grainy tapes from the Cure Lounge. They listened to the stories about a spilled cocktail, the feeling of being disrespected, and that high-speed hunt through the streets of Boston. They heard the witness describe Hernandez hanging out the window, squeezing off 5 rounds, and speeding away. Yet, the jury let him walk. On April 14, 2017, after 6 agonizing days, they cleared Hernandez of the double homicide. The only charge that stuck was illegal gun possession. The defense team's game plan had paid off. They tore down Bradley's credibility just enough to plant reasonable doubt. But that victory was hollow. Hernandez was already rotting in a cell, serving life without parole for killing Odin Lloyd. That gun charge just tacked more years onto an endless sentence. Then, 5 days later, he was gone. But the camera, it always tells the truth. Security tapes were the backbone of both trials. Building a visual timeline from June 16th to the 17th, 2013, this footage was pulled from everywhere. From Hernandez's own high-tech home security setup to feeds from gas stations, nightclubs, and city street cams. The state used these clips to track Hernandez's every step, highlighting a gun-like object in his hand while he was with Lloyd and his crew. Even where the video was fuzzy, it backed up the cell phone pings and physical clues perfectly. On the night of June 16th, cameras at a gas station around 10:11 p.m. caught Hernandez, Wallace, and Ortiz filling up, walking inside, and casually dancing around. Hernandez purchased cigarettes and that famous blue bubblicious gum stuff later linked to a shell casing. Minutes after that transaction, he shared a sweet moment picking up his daughter before rolling out with his 2 partners in a silver rental Nissan. Less than 2 hours down the road, Odin Lloyd would be executed. His home security caught him coming back from Father's Day parties around midnight, saying hello to the sitter, Jennifer Fortier. By 12:45 a.m., he was strolling through his living room, clutching a dark object. The state screamed gun, while the defense insisted it was a remote. At 10:09 a.m., he hopped into the passenger seat of the Altima, with Wallace behind the wheel and Ortiz in the back. Security at Lloyd's place filmed him getting into that Altima at 2:33 a.m. Street cams then tracked the vehicle heading toward the industrial park at 3:27 and 3:28 a.m. Right around 3:25 a.m., grainy footage near the park picked up headlights, arriving, and then peeling out just 4 minutes later, the exact window for the murder. Back at the mansion, cameras showed Hernandez walking in at 3:29 a.m., Solo still gripping that black item. Shortly after, he destroyed his phone. The video was entered as proof of suspicious conduct. The jury found it hard to ignore since it lined up perfectly with tire impressions, signal pings, and DNA, locking in Hernandez's presence and intent. That surveillance didn't just show a guy moving around, it revealed the cold calculation of a hit. Hernandez secured the rental. He scooped up Lloyd. He drove out to the middle of nowhere, and he came back alone, clutching the same dark object he left with. Those cameras spun a narrative the defense just couldn't tear down. The visual evidence in the Odin Lloyd case was absolutely crushing. The irony was thick. Hernandez's own security system, meant to keep him safe, turned into the prosecution's biggest gun. Then the babysitter's testimony filled in the blanks. She broke down how Hernandez acted the night before the killing, dragging her and a friend on a weird detour to his crash pad in Franklin, a flophouse, as the cops called it, where he stashed his drugs and arsenal. I just kept telling him I had to get out of there, because I was the babysitter, and I didn't feel safe. She told the court. Hernandez tried to kiss her, but she shoved him off, saying, "No, I'm your nanny. I can't do this." The very next day, the day Lloyd would die, cameras caught Hernandez greeting her like nothing happened when she arrived for work. The state put together a timeline that was surgical. Every single move Hernandez made on June 16th and 17th, 2013, was on the record. You had the gas station clip of him buying that blue bubblicious, the home video of him gripping the black object, the rental peeling out of his driveway at 10:09 a.m., Lloyd hopping into the ride at 2:33 a.m., the car rolling into the industrial park at 3:27, then the vehicle speeding off just 4 minutes later, Hernandez strolling back into his house at 3:29 a.m., solo, still clutching that dark item. Defense lawyers James Sultan and Michael Fee tried to spin it, claiming that object could be anything, a remote, a phone, maybe a flashlight, but the prosecution slammed back with hard evidence 45 caliber casings found at the scene, including one with Hernandez's DNA on a piece of gum stuck right to it, tire impressions that matched the Ultima perfectly, plus a blunt found near Lloyd's body carrying DNA from both men. The cameras told the truth, and the jury bought it. Now, let's look at her testimony. Do you honestly believe she tossed a box weighing several pounds, claimed it smelled like weed, but never actually peeked inside? I don't recall. Yeah, right. All we know for sure is that the video caught her hauling that box out and stashing it in the trunk of her sister's car. Cheyenne Jenkins, Hernandez's fiancée, got an immunity deal to take the stand. The jury watched the tapes of her lugging a box out of the basement the very day after Lloyd was killed. She told the court Hernandez called with orders to get rid of it. She swore she never opened it up. She claimed it reeked of marijuana. She said she tossed it in a dumpster, but conveniently couldn't remember which one. The jury didn't buy a word of it. The murder weapon gone forever, but that surveillance tape, paired with the physical proof, was enough to nail Hernandez beyond a shadow of a doubt. Then came the verdict and the fallout. Madam Foreperson, regarding indictment 2013-9, a 3A, charging Aaron Hernandez with homicide. What is your verdict, Madam Foreperson? Is the defendant clear of charges? Guilty of first-degree murder, or guilty of second-degree murder? Guilty. Murder in the first degree. Madam Foreperson, on what grounds? Premeditated malice or extreme atrocity? Extreme atrocity and cruelty. On April 15th, 2015, following 36 hours of intense debate over 7 days, Hernandez was found guilty of first-degree murder and every single weapons violation. The jury later opened up about the deciding factors: security footage, the tire impressions, that .22 caliber pistol, and the defense team admitting he was actually at the scene. Hands down, it was the toughest call I ever had to make in my life. It really was. Yeah, without a doubt. We viewed him as innocent right until the evidence proved otherwise. Absolutely. Exactly. And we didn't take that responsibility lightly. 2 years down the road, Hernandez was back in court facing charges for that double homicide in Boston. Bradley's account was central to the case, but the defense team tore his credibility to shreds. Regarding victim Daniel de Abreu, we find the defendant not guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder or second-degree murder, not guilty. On April 14th, 2017, he beat the murder rap but got dinged for the illegal gun possession. The cell block went wild when he returned. He was even talking about getting back into the NFL. 5 days later, April 19th, 2017, guards discovered his lifeless body in his cell at Sousa Baranowski. He had hung himself using a bedsheet. He was only 27. The official ruling was suicide, although his legal team and agent pushed back immediately. Losing your soulmate, the person you love most, it tears you apart. It is horrific. You are left wondering if they are ever going to walk through that door again. Post-mortem analysis uncovered that Hernandez suffered from stage 3 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. It is a degenerative brain disease caused by head impacts, and his was the worst case ever recorded for his age group. The signs of CTE rage. Wild mood swings, poor decision-making matched his behavior perfectly, though people still argue about how much it drove his criminal life. His partner and daughter took the Patriots and the league to court, claiming football destroyed his brain. But a judge tossed the case in 2019 because they missed a deadline to opt out of a class action deal. You remained loyal to Aaron through the entire nightmare. You stood beside him back then. Do you still think your fiancé was wrongly accused? Look, yes, obviously I do. You would have to be heartless to abandon someone who had zero support. Bradley, surviving to testify, revealed a serial killer. Even with his reputation as a violent felon, his decision to take the stand applied massive heat to Hernandez. The guy Hernandez blasted in the face ended up being the guy who made sure the truth came out. Hernandez's life serves as a dark warning about celebrity, mental instability, and uncontrolled rage. That window between the acquittal and his death is a black box. On his final calls, Hernandez sounded happy, celebratory. Even, he told his inner circle, it felt like a massive weight had just been lifted off my shoulders. He spoke about fighting his way home, maybe even returning to the gridiron. Other prisoners asked, "Who are you going to play for?" Like getting back on the field was actually feasible. 8 hours later, he was gone. April 19th, 2017, 3:05 in the morning. Officers found him suspended in his cell, a sheet tied to the window bars. He had jammed the door to prevent anyone from getting in. There were red markings on his hands and feet, and he had scrawled John 3:16 on his forehead in red ink. Authorities recovered 3 handwritten letters. One was for Cheyenne Jenkins, pouring out his heart and quoting the track. "I knew I loved you." It contained a strange line, "You are rich, and I told you what was coming indirectly." Another note referenced the Illuminati and sketched out an unfinished pyramid with an eye. Nobody saw this coming. His attorney, George Leontire, insisted the math didn't add up. Cheyenne couldn't believe it, citing how happy he seemed during their last chat. But rumors swirled. Some think he heard that dying during an appeal wipes the conviction, which would secure the pension money for his family. Just days prior, a radio program was gossiping about his sexual orientation, which likely piled on the emotional stress. Then there was the K2 factor. Word was, Hernandez was smoking synthetic weed. Another prisoner claimed that in the days leading up to the end, Hernandez needed medical help multiple times for overdosing. Corrections officers reportedly turned a blind eye to the drug use. The medical examiner found something truly disturbing. Hernandez was living with stage 3 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, KTA. Dr. Ann McKee from Boston University called it the most advanced decay she had ever seen in a 27-year-old. His frontal cortex looked like it belonged to an elderly dementia patient. The saga of Aaron Hernandez and Alexander Bradley is defined by backstabbing, bloodshed, and eventually, a reckoning. Bradley lived through something that should have killed him. He spoke up when the stakes were highest. Even though Hernandez walked on the Boston charges, Bradley's words helped the world see the real Aaron Hernandez. Not a football hero, but a predator. Hernandez leaves behind a legacy of total ruin. Here was a guy who had it all: skill, millions, a family, and he flushed it down the drain for reasons we will never fully grasp. Brain damage, childhood scars, hidden sexuality, paranoia, and rage all mixed together. But ultimately, he pulled the trigger on his own life decisions. As for Bradley, he walks around with one eye, knowing he looked death in the face and lived to spill the secrets. This case blew the lid off deep issues in the league. How does a franchise miss that many warning signs? How does a guy with gang ties, addiction issues, and a rap sheet land a $40 million deal? Why didn't anyone intervene before 3 bodies dropped? The bond between Aaron and Alexander began with partying and narcotics. It concluded with a slug in Bradley's face, and Hernandez locked away for life. Bradley survived to narrate the horror. Hernandez checked out before his appeal could even start. And, caught in the crossfire, 3 men, Daniel de Abreu, Safiro Furtado, and Odin Lloyd were wiped out by pointless aggression. That is the story of how Aaron Hernandez murdered his closest ally, and how that ally stripped away his mask for the world to see. Smash that like button. Make sure to check out similar deep dives by clicking the suggested cards on your screen.